You know, the cool thing about today's movie is that it's funny again and again and again to the point that it gets repetitive over and over and over. And by the way, this is a plus, not a minus in the world of Palm Springs. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week I plan to bring you in-depth insight into the creative process of storytelling. You know, folks, I was there in the room, as you'll hear me say later. I'm not bragging. I'm just trying to give you the energy because we're all socially distanced and we don't get to see films with each other anymore. And for the moment, I was there at Sundance for their first big screening with 1,200 people, and the crowd lost it. I mean, they went absolutely nuts, as they should have, because the movie was absolutely hilarious. It fired on all cylinders. The performances were great. The writing and the directing was great. Not enough good things to say about it. So it was no surprise when it broke Sundance records and sold for $17.5 million and 69 cents. And we're going to talk about that today because we have the director and co-writer Max Barbakow with us, and we also have co-writer Andy Siara with us. And, you know, Max and Andy really are a great team who have been working together for a long time. They had a lot of great insights into their process to make their first feature-length film together. And I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you'll also check out Backstory Magazine over at www.backstory.net. If you could believe it, in all this madness with movies still not being released into theaters, we are, as a film magazine, still going to produce a new issue number 42, and we're working on it. And for those of you who want to experience who we are and what we do, just go on over to backstory.net, and you could even use code SAVE5. That'll save you $5 off a subscription for 1 year. It'll give you access to about the year's worth of past issues, and we're adding more into our archive. But for now, with the software update, there's basically about a little over a year in there, and it'll give you access to the new stuff we do over a year as well. So at checkout at backstory.net, you could use coupon code SAVE5. That'll give you access on the web via a desktop or laptop. It will also give you access via an iPad with those login credentials if you have one. And it's better for you to subscribe at Backstory than through Apple because it leaves more of your money in our pockets rather than Apple's. So thank you for that. But now, without any further ado, I hope you check out Palm Springs from Hulu. It is playing on Hulu, obviously. It's at drive-ins around the nation. It is really worth your time. It's a hilarious movie. It's a great, well-crafted love story. There's a lot to it that I don't want to spoil for you, but check it out and see what all the hype is about, because now we're going to get into our conversation with Max and with Andy about their feature debut, Palm Springs. Andy, Max, I loved your film. So congrats on that. And I was actually at Sundance at the Eccles Theater for your first screening, and I thought it was, you know, incredible. The crowd just went crazy for it. So the energy in the room of just seeing it with a huge audience of 1,200 people was awesome. So congrats on that to both of you. I loved it.
Thank you.
You know, we always try and start with breaking in stories, and I'm just curious, your background. Did either of you study film in school or theater? What's kind of your background that drove you down the path?
I saw on June 11th, 93, I saw Jurassic Park, and I'm like, oh, that's what I want to do. And my mom's best friend gave me a shoulder mount camera. I was 7 at the time, and I just spent the next, all elementary school, junior high, and high school making little short films that, the Romeo and Juliet and the Crucible and Bridge to Terabithia. So I always knew I wanted to do that, but then in some time, my older brother asked me to be in his indie rock band when I was a junior in high school, and so I obviously said yes to that, and that kind of sent me down the touring indie rock band path for the next 10 years, mainly the 5 years after I finished undergrad, where I did some creative writing classes in college, but I did not actively pursue film. I kind of like.
Sorry to interrupt. Where'd you go to school?
I went to UC Irvine. And then, I finished my last final, ran across the street, hopped in the band van, headed out the South by, which kind of started like the first of 5 years of doing laps around the country. And then when the band kind of plateaued and my older brother and I decided it's time to call it a day, I did not know what else to do other than give this film making thing a real shot. So I was like, okay, what are some film schools? And so I just decided to apply to AFI at that point, like a couple weeks before applications were due. And I think it was the one that didn't require the GRE, and I had not taken the GRE yet. And so I was like, I did not know what else to do with my life. The one thing that I had ever been passionate about was film and then television. Once I saw The Sopranos when my wisdom teeth were taken out in 1999, and at that point, like I knew I had to pursue this and give it a shot. And that's
what was the camera that you were given at a young age? Just before we move on to Max, what kind of camera was it?
Oh, I can't remember the brand of it. I know it's the one you put the full VHS in there.
The newsman camera.
Yeah, it
nice.
was just this huge thing that I wore into the ground. But it was, it was that summer is where I saw that Jurassic Park that summer 9 times, and that's what I was chasing that throughout. And then, in the later 90s, like when my brother introduced me to, Coen Brothers and Kubrick and P.T. Anderson, that's when I was like, oh, well, there's this whole side of it too. And yeah.
And just last question before we get to Max, when you were at AFI, was it during the time when they would not invite some people back for the second year? Because I've interviewed a lot of people about that, and it kind of pits students against each other. And it's always interesting to hear how that went or didn't go if that was when you were there. They
say they do that. I know they didn't invite some people back, but ultimately they just need money. And so, there is a kind of a natural weeding out process that goes along with like at a film school like that, especially one that is just very, very expensive too. And people realize there's a lot of soul searching that goes on, so people naturally kind of just drop off. But it definitely is not like it used to be, where I know that in the earlier 90s, there was one year in the 90s where like the myth was that half the class was cut.
Right.
And that is not.
I think that was also because of space considerations, which they never talk about. They just couldn't afford at the time. They didn't have the space to let the whole class cut their thesis films, like in the mid 90s, which they never talked about.
Well, just for our listeners, Andy and Max, you both share story by credit, and Andy, you have screenwriting credit, and Max, you directed. Max, get to your past, like breaking in. What drew you to all this?
I also went to AFI kind of on a whim, and that's where Andy and I met the second day there, and bonded over music and Eastbound and Down, and how that show could make you laugh and cry and has toxic characters who hide behind their toxicity because they're too vulnerable to admit that they feel things. But before that, I used to take my grandmother. I grew up in Santa Barbara, and my grandmother lived in Camarillo when she was older. And I used to take her to movies with my brother, who's 7 years older than me, in Camarillo. And then we go to Soup Plantation to eat soup in the salad bar, and then go to Best Buy, and she'd buy us DVDs. And she bought me Boogie Nights when I was like 8.
8?
Yeah, 8 or 9. And I watched that movie, and that I already had an older brother who was 7 years older than me and was showing me the good stuff. Like, again, I came at it kind of where I think where Andy went. I came at it from like the Coen side and the Soderbergh side and like the Tarantino side really. But Boogie Nights was the movie that kind of blew my mind initially because of all the crazy stuff in it, all the sex and the drugs and all the, all that.
That's a lot to process for 8 years old, man. That's a lot.
Like, this is what softcore is, but or hardcore. But just continued. It was one of the first movies I was like, this feels different. This feels like rock and roll. This feels like very special and like unlike anything I'd ever seen. And then revisiting it, seeing all the different elements, the visual style and what that was indebted to, and then how the story elements worked and how there was so much going on in there beyond the stuff that blew my mind. And it kind of made me want to be a filmmaker. And I've always known I wanted to make films. But like those directors that I loved in the 90s growing up and coming to love films, never wanted to like go directly and do it. Like I felt like I needed to rebel and kind of take the long way around and accrue some life experience along the way to have something to say almost. So I I went back east for college. I went to Yale and studied American Studies there, which is as vague as it sounds. I just got to take a lot of liberal arts stuff, and studied documentary there, and went and did some traveling and made some documentaries in like Bolivia and Southeast Asia, and made a documentary about my adoption.
I was going to get to that. You know, we always kind
Yeah.
of say, what's your biggest lesson from your breaking in story? I just want to time date things though. What year did you guys graduate AFI?
2015.
15. Okay. And so your documentary is Mommy, I'm a Bastard. And it was your first full length feature foray.
Yeah.
What was your biggest lesson from making that?
I mean, everything, I think, because I didn't know anything. And that's kind of when you don't overthink things, you make very happy mistakes, and you have the ability to be super creative and think outside the box just because you're kind of learning as you go. So with the doc, I did everything on that movie except for do the music. My brother did the music, but I was, editing. I think I learned most just about the power of the edit, and also storytelling too, like how to tell a compelling story without really knowing anything about act structure. I just was kind of like feeling my way out as I was shooting this movie. And it was very, and the importance of creativity and kind of just invention, because that movie was very inspired by like Ross McElwee, the Sherman's Art in Sherman's March, that documentary he made, which is super personal. And then just like the Werner Herzog notion of ecstatic truth, and like facts don't matter, but truth is all that matters. And how that could be very dynamic and interesting. So it was really just actually starting something that was a short, that was my thesis at college, which was Mommy, I'm a Bastard, and turning it into a feature and chasing it and finishing it. So I think starting and finishing, and then just the power of the edit were like the two things that I learned. And now in directing too, like, and even with rewriting, thinking about like you're writing and it's all in the reworking of ideas. Like it's never finished until you kind of thoroughly rework an idea and make it the best possible version of itself.
And just before we get to Palm Springs, Andy, your first gig, to my knowledge, was writing on the TV show Lodge 49. And what was your biggest lesson as a writer on your first big gig? And then we're going to dive straight into Palm Springs.
Lodge 49, I was on it for 4 years, because that was an interesting show, because it's a show that only went 2 seasons that still, sadly not many people have heard about, but it was such a formative experience in my life. It was almost like, if I finished AFI, it's like a postdoctorate. I mean, for 4 years, 2 years at AFI versus 4 years there. I feel like Jim Gavin, the creator of Lodge 49, is one of the most talented writers I know, and one of the most empathetic people I know. And when the showrunner Peter Rocco came on to work with him, they're like this perfect match and this perfect collaborative partnership. And they set the tone for, like, you talk to anyone that worked on that show, from the crew level to the actors to the writers, like it was such a kind show. And I think on a storytelling level, I learned like how to be deeply empathetic toward characters, a deeply empathetic writer, while on the other side of just like, it's a top-down mentality. If you create a good, healthy environment, and that's how Peter and Jim led that show. And I feel like, I don't know, I feel so indebted to those two. I will always look to them as like, I don't know, for like mentorship advice in a way, on just like how to tackle life and how to tackle story. But also, like, honestly, one of the important things I learned, specifically from Peter, who is he's a family man. He's a lifetime writer. He's been doing this for 30 plus years or whatever, but he also is a family man, and he had this balance of family life, fatherhood, and work life, and like in a healthy way. And I feel so lucky that I got that right out of undergrad, or right out of grad school, so that like the risk is always like becoming too obsessive about the work and forgetting about there's this whole other part about life that is that needs more attention. And
yeah.
yeah, with a family of my own, like I learned how to balance all that stuff from them. So
That's great. And that's really important for longevity, of course. And as you said, it really goes top down in the attitude of a show. So having that kind of mentality from the top's important. So getting straight into Palm Springs, and we're in the non-spoiler section right now, but we'll get into spoilers a little later. Really, I'm just curious because most writers, when they know that they're in the shadow of Groundhog Day, they kind of give up, because how could you do better than Groundhog Day? But what's so entertaining about your film is you take it in a different direction, but you still, I feel, pay a little bit of homage to some of the thematics of Groundhog Day, and kind of go in your own direction. Tell me how Palm Springs started. I know it's the most boring question that you've been asked a million times, but we're going to get deeper into the story mechanics. So it'll be interesting to hear how the idea formed.
At AFI, Max and I made a couple shorts together. We made our thesis film together. And then during our second year there, Charlie McDowell and Justin later came and showed us The One I Love. And they're both AFI grads. I think they had graduated maybe 8 years earlier than when they came, roughly that. And they talked about being stuck in, or finishing school and being stuck in kind of a development hell on some other movie. And then they were 5 years out of school, and they didn't have much to show for it. And I think Charlie McDowell said he had a general meeting with Mark Duplass, who said, like, well, what do you have that we can just go and make with, like, something on the cheap? And then they made The One I Love. And so their advice to our entire class was like, go make something right away. And it's that same kind of Mark Duplass Duplass brothers model of just go make something. And I think Max and I took that to heart. And the week after we graduated, I think exactly 5 years ago, maybe this weekend or last weekend, we were like, let's make our first movie together. We headed out to Palm Springs and had our own little lost weekend, and we're talking about, like, what do we want this movie to be? Let's do something that is one location or a few locations contained that we know we can do. And we both have an affinity to Palm Springs, so that's why we settled on Palm Springs. But out of that weekend, we came with like a sketch of this character, Niles, who was born out of conversation between me and Max, and mining our own personal fears and shame and insecurities. And from that point on, it kind of it evolved into the Groundhog Day thing in a way. It didn't just you ask us 5 years ago, it was more of like our version of Leaving Las Vegas in a sense. And as our own personal lives change over the following years, and the influence of Lodge 49 on me, all that stuff, it led the movie into a different direction than I think we initially set out to do. And then once we landed on the Groundhog Day aspect of it all, you can look at Groundhog Day as, maybe at the end he figures out the meaning of life, and he's gifted the day ending and the next day begins. So one of our jumping off points was like, okay, well, let's say we have this character Niles, who we know so well because we'd written different versions of the movie pre-time loop with him. Like, let's say he gets stuck in a time loop and lives all that and figures out the meaning in life, or what he thinks the meaning in life is, and then only to it get to the point where he doesn't get out. Nope, still stuck there. The day just starts over again. Like, okay, well, now what do you do? And so, that being the jumping off point, that being like our starting point, where this is essentially it's a sequel to a movie that doesn't exist. Like, there's a whole other movie that exists where Niles gets stuck in the time loop, and we see that whole movie play out. But that was less interesting to us because
wait, slow down. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to hear about that other movie for a second. Like, was it really just that he's trying to figure out his life and then he accidentally gets stuck in the time loop? Is like, does the other movie end like that? Because I love stuff like that.
We never did the movie where he gets stuck in the time loop. There was I mean, I don't know how deep we want to go here, Max.
Please go for it.
I mean, you're seeing semblance, I guess, in terms of the day or the wedding as you experience it, as with Misty and Trevor in the bathroom. You're seeing stuff that he experienced that probably drove him to get shit-faced and go find that cave. So you're, and the way that Kristen's character kind of navigates that night, you're seeing maybe a semblance of the experience that Niles has seen, before, that got him into this space. But there's tons of stuff that you haven't seen, and it was, that's kind of the.
What was it titled?
The initial 100 Years From Now was like the initial title, which was a bird song, a Graham Parsons song.
Okay, that's cool. Well, so then how long did it take you to write the actual script, knowing that there were previous iterations? I guess knowing that there were a few previous iterations, how long did it take you to write the script that we now know as Palm Springs once you introduced the time element?
Yeah, it was over a couple of false starts. Once we landed on like the actual movie we want to do, and we understood who this other character was, Siara, and I had gotten married in that time in Palm Springs, and I think all these life things that we went through were essential to it all, and balancing the work life of Lodge and this. I remember, like, once we had all that in place, it was December, like just after, like end of December of 2016, and I think almost a month later, it was very quick actually that it all came out. I had a 130-page draft, 140-page, like not good draft at all, that I was like, okay, but that was the first time the movie had a script that most closely resembles the final movie. And then from that point on, like, I gave that to Max, then we just talked nonstop. And anytime I would dive back into it, this is the beauty of having like a collaborator like Max, and like, a friendship like that, is that instead of like me going back into a hole for the next 2 months to go write the next draft, I would just like start writing. And then if I get excited about a scene, I just take a screenshot and text it to Max and say, hey, what do you think? And my hope is that he either laughs or he feels something, and then if he feels nothing, he tells me he feels nothing, and I then wallow in shame for a bit and then try again. And then it was a month plus of writing that draft, but then another 9 months after that of like fine tuning until we finally landed. Like that Roy character he was one of the last elements to be added to it.
Oh, okay.
Later that year.
Well, so I'm going to ask you both quick questions about your creative habit, just to get like a baseline. Obviously, Max, when you're directing a feature, pre-production is key as a director. And I'm curious what some of the things were that helped you. I know we're getting ahead of you guys setting it up and selling it, which I'm still going to go to, but I just want to talk about creative habits. What were some of the really important things that helped you out as a director in your pre-production that made your production go smoother on this?
I think just in terms of the writing of it, having spent the time with Andy too, like a lot of the directing was written into the scripts, just transitions and the rhythm of scenes and even certain camera moves and music cues. Like I'd been thinking about it for so long that it was all about communicating in prep to department heads and collaborators, like exactly what we were going to do. And then like kind of just describing thematically, because there's a lot, it's very rich thematically. And I think a lot of people, it's very relatable. What we were after and what kind of the feeling was, so they could take ownership over it and kind of elevate it. But I think the thing that I'm so glad I did, that I kind of spent the most time on in prep, was just sitting with our DP, who's amazing. Her name's Qtran, and not even shot listing, but just talking through the script emotionally and kind of developing a very grounded, human-driven visual language, moment to moment, that has very subtle shifts, because you're seeing the same moments again and again, but you're never seeing the same thing twice. You're seeing things kind of in a different way. So that was very, very important. And then also, I think it was amazing to have the time with The Lonely Island and Andy. It saved us a lot of time in prep, tailoring that role for him as Niles, and just getting Kristen on board too, kind of understood what we were after. There wasn't much time or need really to kind of like talk things over with them. They just kind of responded to it and got it and took ownership over it. But visual style wise, like that was the thing I think I spent most time on in prep. And there were, we had spent so much time working on the movie. And again, it was something that we just wanted to go make quick, like the one I love. And instead it ballooned into a completely different animal. But I had kind of the visual approach prepared and just kind of the production plan prepared that we were in some ways able to tailor to a little bit of a bigger scale. So that was helpful.
That's awesome. And, you were talking about transitions a second ago. One of the things that struck me in the movie was that there were so many details that you could just tell were intricate. Even early on, when they're sitting outside, when his girlfriend Misty is cheating on him, and he says, it's not like you have a leg up. And then in the background, she says, hold my leg up, and it was just that the back and forth of those moments were just really well plotted in the script that, that's not something you would really get out of improv. You have to do the advanced planning.
And honestly, so much of that is like, it's because we had so much time with the script. And I remember like right before we officially like kind of took it out, Max came over. I think my wife was at a bachelorette party. So Max came over with I think like a 48 pack of Tecate, and we just put the script up on the big screen and just like walk through line by line. And the point of it was just to like, are there any points where we're bored, or can this get better? And it was like, just punching it up in that sense. And I think that helped with the many layers, hopefully. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah. Well, so lightning round for you, Andy. Just a few things on your creative habit. How important is outlining to your process when you're writing your script?
I think outlining is what a better writer would do. For this one, it was, and maybe for a different kind of movie, an outline would make sense. We may have never found the movie that it became because of how like the way it kind of organically grew over time. If there was any outline with it, but I think because Max and I were not beholden to anybody for those 2.5, 3 years or whatever of talking about this, where it was solely just to entertain each other. That allowed for so much to be found through the writing and through our discussions that we would have, and taking like a corkboard of loose ideas into and allowing myself to get lost in the writing in that sense.
So were you note carding with your corkboard? Like, is that what you were doing, or no?
I mean, at one point we tried a note card thing, but like, again,
it was so messy. It was like throwing initially every idea we ever wanted to see in a movie on a corkboard, and then like re-outlining that, and then that went away. It just like there was no method to it until Andy started trying it. Yeah, but I feel like that's why it's kind of alive in a certain sense. That feeling is still in the movie.
Yeah, because I think that if we, we initially like we looked to Rachel Getting Married as one of those like earlier touchstone movies for trying to. If we would have outlined, I think we could have had, a version of that was just not as good, because that movie is great. And I think it was just in not outlining, it allowed for some of the stranger things to just bubble up, be it like those ideas that come when you get into that, maybe there's like a runner's high that happens.
Sure.
At a certain point. And that's what I because no one was saying like, no, don't follow that. And I had Max saying, yes, do that. Being encouraged to follow those instincts that's what allowed to break from the outline kind of thing. And
so just really quick, when you work, do you like to give yourself a page count to hit each day, or a certain amount of hours that you want to write?
Yeah. One of the good lessons I got from this, one of my teachers at AFI was, once you want to actually start writing this thing. And that's what happened at the end of 2016, top of 2017. Like when I knew I wanted to have a draft, it's like giving yourself a daily quota. And I think I gave myself like 7 pages a day, or I can't remember the exact number, but the lesson was always like, give yourself that quota. If it takes you, let's say 5 pages a day, if it takes you 10 hours to do 5 pages, then it's going to be a long day. If it takes you 3 hours to do 5 pages, you have a short day. But just always make sure you hit that every day. And then by the end of however long, you will have your 120, 130, in my case, bloated 140 page script. But I felt it's like it was so important to get that first draft out. And that's where giving that quota helps just keep your eye on like just finish this thing, because then you can go back and make it better. But it'll turn off that voice in your head that says, no, this is terrible.
I would be remiss if I didn't blaze through these last non-spoiler questions. It's really important for anybody, especially a film school grad, to set up their first big project and to stay on it and not lose control, right? A lot of people want to take your script and give it to another director, but you guys, you stayed with it and you were able to do that. What do you think was key in that process of selling your script and setting it up that kept you in the room, per se? For both of you.
I mean, like, when it came to it, I think both Max and I, maybe I don't want to speak for Max, but speak for myself, that like, I would rather the movie not exist and Max and I can still be friends in 20, 30 years. So we can never break up that partnership. Because to be honest, like, that was still the most fun part of this whole thing was collaborating on this with, one of my best buddies. And I have to think, maybe I'm wrong, that maybe Andy and the Lonely Island guys, like, they came up in a way sticking together, and maybe they saw that, and on top of that, they're just those dudes. And
that's great.
And Becky Sloviter, the producer who was running it, like, they wanted us involved. Especially, in my, obviously Max has to be involved, but there's been many times where, it's like, goodbye screenwriter. But no, like, there was a lot of respect and on all of their parts. And so, I was there every day.
What was the budget and the schedule that they greenlit the movie for?
It was, I will say, I think Andy's spot on just in terms of like, how did we get, I think if we make the movie with anybody, or try to make the movie with anybody other than the Lonely Island, it just is a completely different experience, just because they're a true collective and it's truly collaborative, and they've known each other forever, and I think they recognized how personal the story was for us and how distinctive it was. The budget was I think like $4 to $5 million in 21 days shooting, which is insane.
Oh wow, 21 days.
Yeah.
Did you guys have rehearsal, Max? Is rehearsal important to you?
Generally it is, but we didn't really have rehearsal time. No, like we did a read through with Andy and Kristen, which Andy was at as well, which was a wonderful experience. Not that it was necessarily, we had to fix anything,
right,
per se. I mean, they made suggestions and we fixed stuff, but just to like see like, oh my God, this is going to work before going into it. Like, it was very electric in between them, just as a dynamic, and like the energy was palpable when we read through that. So we're just like, oh my God, they have chemistry.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because Sandberg has such a great comedic timing, and it's a lucky position to be in, to have him in your debut feature. I am curious if, when you guys at least did even a staged reading or something like that, did it necessitate any major script changes? I mean, if it's something you need to say for the spoiler section, we can, but it's just always interesting to hear about those tweaks after casting.
Not really. I mean, I feel like you can speak to this, Andy, too, but like we changed word, like it just got better. There are little quips that were added in there. And even when we were shooting it, every setup, I kind of opened it up when we got what we needed to get, and they were able to kind of, I wouldn't say there was improvisation for sure, but also just like loosely say it in their own words and try things. But can you remember anything, Andy? I think
that's the benefit of having, one of the lead actors a part of that whole, like, in further developing it with them. That was another 2 months or so. So like, any lines that he couldn't, like, there'd be word tweaks just to fit him, but him being a part of that process that whole time was just, that's kind of invaluable. And then Kristen's just an incredible actor that she just can give her anything and she'll make it look and sound good. So like it wasn't any, like, I wouldn't say major changes. I mean, we'll get into it when we get into spoilers and whatnot. Yeah. All
right. Good to know. It made history when it sold for $17.5 million and 69 cents at Sundance, which beats Nate Parker's Birth of a Nation from 2016 by 16 cents, because he was 69 cents. He was the previous a winner of the largest sale ever. Are there any fun memories that you want to give us before we get into the spoilers of just being in the room for a bidding war like that on your first feature film, which is just awesome?
strange. I mean, like, I read the stories about those like late night sessions in the suites, meeting with different distributors and buyers and whatnot. But to be there at the end of the day, where like we premiered at 3:00 in the afternoon and had an after party, and then had like an after dinner after party, and then several hours later, late into the night, doing just listening and watching those little pitch sessions. It's you're sobering up for the third time that day. I mean, there were many moments throughout the entire weekend where Max and I like looked at each other like, this is crazy. This whole thing, even just showing like when the movie premiered and sitting next to each other in the back of that theater, when the movie was no longer ours anymore, we were about to show it to people, and in an hour and a half they could just come out and hate it, but showing it to a sold out crowd and seeing, like, knowing where my family was sitting, and my brother and my wife and Amanda's, or my Amanda wife, and where Max's family and was sitting, and the cast and crew, like this, that was like an overwhelming emotional moment there, remembering back 7 years earlier when Max and I first met on like that first second day of school. So like there was like those parts of the journey were always like coming in, and then ending that crazy weekend with that sale. It was there's a video that I have on my phone that when we found out when it was like first announced, as Max and I were like on our way to the second screening, and it was we're just goofy little kids that I don't think either of us ever imagined this movie like getting to play at Sundance, making a movie that can play at Sundance, let alone all that. So it's I don't know, we feel very lucky and fortunate. So.
All right, so we're going to get into the spoilers. If there's anybody watching this that has not yet seen the movie, please press pause, go see the movie, and come back, because we're going to talk about the details in the movie in some very specific points. My first question is kind of a strange one, because I've been thinking about it a lot. I know that you will. I know which way you will probably answer, but I'm just curious. Who do you consider to be the actual protagonist? Because as far as it goes, when it comes down to it, Niles, although I know you started writing the script about him and he has more screen time than Sarah, we actually know more about Sarah, and she's the more active character for much of the movie, and especially the third act. And do you consider them co-protagonists, or do you consider Niles the protagonist? So I'm really curious about how you look at it.
I'd say
both of you.
I'm personally on the co-protagonist side. It's just a total two-hander, and they both by the end like represent different ends of the spectrum, and needed to have this like collision course in order to get out the other end where they come out.
Max,
yeah,
do you agree?
Definitely a two-hander, and it was funny on the page. It started with Niles, and it feels more like Niles' movie on the page. But once you put it up and you start like in prep thinking about it, you're like, oh, this guy is passive as hell, and he's indifferent as hell. And she's obviously the emotional catalyst of the movie. So it definitely was a realization when we were actually making it. It's like, oh, this is really interesting and different feeling, just because of it's a two-hander, but the energies are so disparate that it kind of waxes and wanes in terms of where your allegiances lie, where your sympathies lie too.
Structure is really important. And for a time travel movie, one of the interesting things that you guys do here that really, really worked well for both the characters to make it such a character-based story is the shifts in point of view. And I could see so many different debates that you probably had on the page and even in editing as to when to drop in certain things, because I could see some things as being modular and other things as probably being set in stone. Like I would guess, the character's secret of Sarah's, that she is sleeping with the groom to be, her sister's husband to be, the night before their wedding. It's very interesting that it was dropped in the third act, but I'm curious if something like that maybe came earlier and the audience had more sense of dread of why she was hating the days, because it's interesting. It's an element that really sticks with you on the second viewing, because I've been fortunate enough to see it twice, in which you get her dread a lot more the second time around because you know her secret, which I think is some of the fun of the movie.
It's funny because that actually, and if I'm not mistaken, Max, that came a little later, that reveal, and it was one of the final drafts, like just a month before we started shooting, where we realized like that is a problem, and we needed to put that a little earlier because it was asking a little too much of the audience to like keep going along for this ride without any kind of context provided. And so yeah, that ended up getting moved, just a little bit earlier, so that like the audience was aware of it. I think I want to say before we found out, the audience found out as Niles found out, and now in the movie, it's audience knows before Niles knows. And now that's the hardest balance to like is what the audience knows versus what our characters know, and that's a lot of math that makes my head explode.
You navigated it really well. I mean, your opening, the pacing of the movie was fantastic, and your structure carried it. But just even some of the things you did, in which you got the tropes out of the way of living the fast, crazy life, of time return each day, and it allowed you to get into a more character driven piece about their love story, which it really focuses on. For the people that compare it to Groundhog Day, his character's journey at first is just to stop being a jerk. And interestingly here, you really have, just talking thematics, you have a nihilistic debate about quote unquote the meaning of life, right? And you're basically getting into this concept of being lost and found, which comes out in the monologues at first during the wedding and later on, especially for Niles' character. I'm curious how conscious you were of theme as you were writing it, because you really baked a lot in there that I think resonates.
I mean, I was just to touch on one of those Peter Ocko from Lodge 49, one of those lessons. I remember when he had said, you should always give your character a speech. It just helps a lot. It was like later that day, I was like, okay, I'm going to write a wedding speech for Niles. But yeah, all of that thematic, I don't know what to call it, juice maybe, I don't know. I would say that came out of these long therapeutic conversations that Max and I had over those years, so that like that kind of became this guiding light whenever we were talking about where to take a scene, or hitting a wall. It's like you go back to theme. Like if it's not in support of the theme, then why does it need to be in there? And also, like right before I started writing, Max gave me his copy of the Be Here Now, the Ram Dass, and he had like 100 Post-it notes of different pages marked and notes marked, and I would and there's a lot of thematic stuff that came from that, and I would open to a random page that Max had saved in there every day, just to kind of like kickstart the day writing. And I think that just helped make sure I was always like on that right thematic path, so I can stay in that lane without wandering off too much.
It was perfect. I mean, it was a lot of great conversations that strangely now, even under our worldwide pandemic, resonate quite well, in which people sometimes feel a loss of time and days repeating that are quarantining. So, it's taken on a whole different life than your original intention. Max, directorially, there was something that you did early on that was great. It was showing the familiarity with the world that Niles has during the wedding sequence, where he's in on every detail a moment before it happens, ranging from putting a chair under the drunk guy right as he's ready to collapse and knowing which drink to grab. What were the difficulties of doing a scene that complicated, which seemed like a lot of long shots? Like you didn't, I don't want to use the word cheat because it's not a cheat to cut it up, but you did a lot of, mise en scène. You did it all in your frame, most of it.
That was important to me to make it feel, again, the movie was all about like the human grounded story in a heightened world. And part of the way you kind of can, I feel like, pull people into that and make them feel like it's real, so to speak, or like it's unfolding is just not cutting and doing as much in camera as possible, and also using, you know, big anamorphic lenses and creating a sense of scope and let it, you know, you could kind of swim in it a little bit. It was, you know, it was a lot of that was put on the page. That Andy and Kristen are so talented. I think they learned that dance once, like a week before we shot. And then because it's a dance, it's kind of, that first dance is him beckoning to her, she rejects him. And then that dance kind of comes back and they do it together in the bar. When they go into the bar, and they learned both of those parts, didn't practice until kind of like the night of. We did that, I think, in like, again, we had no time on this movie, but we did that very quickly. Andy did that very quickly. And the choreographer just was great. Just kind of blocked it out, and it was a lot of fun to watch. It's one of those things where it's, you know, it's like a good awkward joke that gets dragged out. You just want it. You didn't know, you couldn't foresee how it was gonna end, and we just wanted to kind of like draw it out until he reached her. So it made sense to try to do it in one. And that's the fun stuff with the writing too. I feel like that was one of those on that polish weekend that we just continued to like embellish when we threw it up on the screen. Just like, what does that dance actually look like?
In comedy, there's the concept of setup and payoff, and of course non sequiturs, and you really kind of had them both, in which, you know, you had the setup and payoff of Orchid Explosion by Formative, you know, which just kept coming back, which was great. But then you also have this great non sequitur of the one of the key moments in the film when he's trying to get to her at the end. He just literally walks onto Spuds' firing range and shows the richness of your world, and does this quick, brief monologue about how he's his lost son and could he get a ride. Now, it's not true that he's his lost son. He's taking information he knows. But how did you balance between those two? Because it's interesting that if you go too far in either direction, it'll seem hammy. But you guys really spread those out, and you did it really well. So I'm just curious what you learned about comedy performance and writing and directing through that experience as well.
I mean, like, I think I love a good setup and a good payoff. That's what I like about movies so much, is that, you know, by the end, everything is there for a reason. In a way, it's all part of the same tapestry. There should not be any loose ends. So if we're setting up a character or an idea, we should pay it off in some sense. That's why it was so important to always like keep that Spud scene in there, because otherwise, what's the point of Spuds other than just like, you know, they go to that shooting range. And I think there's this just feeling of completion when you get a good setup and payoff. As for that balance, at least on the writing side, or at least what I was witnessing from, you know, what we tried to do in the script, and then once we get to the actual movie, is that's the benefit of having someone like Andy Samberg who can deliver lines that would normally be hammy or would I don't know, by a different performer might not land, but he knows how to deliver that so well.
Hello, I'm breaking in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine. That's right, my absolute passion project, Backstory. You could find it on a desktop or laptop at backstory.net. Of course, you could get a subscription at backstory.net, and you will then get credentials where you could log in on an iPad as well with the Backstory app. You know, we're one of the only magazines in the world that publishes screenplays in their entirety. We interview writers, directors, actors, editors, producers, playwrights, novelists, you name it. So it's like, if you like storytelling, I hope you'll check out Backstory. And for a limited time, you could use code SAVE5 at checkout, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory Magazine. So you'll see the new issue, number 42, which we're working on during quarantine, and you'll get access to about the year's worth of old issues. And we're adding to our archive to add more of our old issues, because due to a software update, a lot of our old issues were zapped, so we have to now re-add them. So that's fun. But anyhow, I really appreciate you considering checking out Backstory. If you go over there, you could read issue 37. It was our Avengers Endgame issue. You could read it for completely free. Check us out, test drive us, and I think that'll show you that we're worth your time. So thanks for checking out Backstory Magazine. And now, without any further ado, let's jump right back into our conversation with Max and Andy about their latest film, Palm Springs. Max, did you have to kind of give yourself some sort of color coding to remind yourself where you were, to give directions to the actors as to where they were in the timeline with so many flashbacks, especially those setups and payoffs as well? I could see it being kind of complicated, even though it's also straightforward if you understand the script.
Yeah, everyone was so smart and in it, and I would always remind people where we were coming from and what was coming, just to kind of calibrate them. But they were always on it. The hard stuff was when we would shoot stuff out of sequence and continuity would be established. Like, for instance, JK had an idea, and I'm so bummed. Like, we already shot Andy crawling into the cave the first time we meet JK, that he would drop his crossbow, his hunting bow, at the mouth of the cave because he wouldn't need it, because he was going to start the day over again and walk in without that, and that would be like I was like, that's brilliant, but we already shot the other end of this. It can't work. So there was stuff like that, and lost opportunities, but everybody was it's just a really fun concept to engage with, and it's so evergreen and everyone's familiar with the time loop that, like, of course we were reminded, and we were reminding each other, but it was like this fun game that everyone was excited to kind of like beat coming to work. Like, no, it's this way, like because of this and this, right. And like he's coming from there.
It's fun that you mentioned JK, because like I was going to bring that up as my next question. One of the interesting things about the movie is there isn't really a clear set antagonist. Like, I could have easily seen it being JK's character of Roy. And at the beginning, when you meet him, you think, oh, it's going to be, a spy versus spy type of thing. The whole movie, they're going to be going back and forth, but it wasn't that at all. And JK's scene becomes one of the more poignant scenes in Irvine, where he says, I hope you find your Irvine, at his house, in which he's really taking on the finer things in life. Was that difficult for your story, for either one of you, to not really have an antagonist to pin it on, in which maybe your protagonists are their own anti-heroes in themselves?
I mean, I think that's why that character was the last one to be added. Like, I think Max and I both felt, this is after several drafts of script, we both felt there was still something missing, an ingredient that was missing, and it was out of that. I remember this conversation very clearly, when we came up with the idea of Roy, and there's the Jungian individuation shadow reasoning for having Roy, and then there's just the fun of a Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner aspect of having Roy, and yeah, I don't know.
I like where you found him. Like, so I thought it was another job of perfect balancing. I'm curious if there were any left turns, something that you guys wrote about or conceived, maybe through a storyboard or a design, that you didn't have enough time or money to execute, but something that was kind of left on the drawing board that folks who are fans of the film would have fun hearing about.
I mean, in the writing, there was talk about spuds. There was an entire spud sequence involving like pet bunny rabbits in the multiverse, and
kids,
Schrodinger's cat, and kids. Yeah, like there's so much talk about, like, thinking about the physics of the universe.
That whole opening dance sequence, like Max and I looked at The Great Beauty. And too bad we can't afford 300 extras. We can only afford so many extras, and have to do it in like a quarter of a day rather than like having multiple days. So there's like bigger versions of those. There was also
like the beer cans being thrown, like the we wanted that to feel like Saving Private Ryan. And with the bullets going through the water, and like we have cans, just everything kind of made it in, but it wasn't at the vivid scale maybe that we had been imagining in our minds.
Yeah.
Were there any important rewrites that you needed during production, or something during production that you had to tinker with while the film was happening? So, obviously you guys are a close-knit team, so if you needed to rewrite something, you could have, or did production pretty much go according to plan?
Production was madness, just because it was so rushed, and there were weather problems, and we got everything we needed. But I think something that was always up for debate was always the ending. That was one thing that we have so many different alts for that, and Andy was working on those as we were shooting. We tried a bunch of those in that pool.
Let's lean into that, actually, because the ending has a fantastic monologue outside the cave. Again, a good speech, as you guys have said, and it's a very funny speech where they're doing a long-term run-on sentence and he's using, you know, ampersand, commas, ellipticals, the whole 9 yards. And he's really come full force. You know, he's ready to go for it. And you also drop in kind of a little sliver that you know, they need to warn JK that they might have found a way out. So you were planting seeds for that. What were the challenges with the ending? Tell us what some of your alts were, because I could easily see it ending as a cut to black, and you don't really know if the day ends or not, but they've both learned their lesson.
Which was an option for sure.
What was your original ending?
There was an original scripted ending that this is a tough one. I got this question earlier today too, and I didn't know how to properly answer it. There is a way that there's an answer to whether they got out of the loop or not, whether this cave explosion thing worked or not. And I think there might be different interpretations of that. I feel like I know I have an idea of what that was, but we want to kind of leave it open a little bit. And it's kind of, I think the ending is a reflection of that, not wanting, we didn't want any kind of too clean of an ending, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean,
what were some of the other alternates that you had early on, if you remember some of those?
I think the thing that we agreed on always from when we started talking and working with The Lonely Island was that we wanted people to leave the theater. We wanted to kind of talking about the movie. We didn't want like a clean conclusion. We wanted, you know, kind of an open-ended ending to the degree that is the ending that we have now is up for debate. It's what you take from it. But we wanted the ending to force, you know, to hold a mirror up to like what people had brought into the movie in the first place, whether you're a cynic or an optimist, or you believe in love, or you believe they got out, or they didn't get out. But I mean, there were different things they were talking about. I think what happened with the original ending was that, like you said, we had this speech at the cave, and there was a longer dialogue scene in the pool, and it just felt kind of like, because the movie is about rhythm too, like you're saying, it's very kind of well structured and dynamic and feels well calibrated. It kind of felt redundant, so we kind of experimented with a bunch of stuff, and the shorter moment felt better. But there were, I mean, we had different animals by the side of the pool that were, you know, seemingly evoked different conclusions. We had, what else do we have, Andy? We had
no family there. I mean, it was all
no family. We had a goat.
All degrees of what is there. You know, more talk, less talk, different animals. The one you know, constant was in the last frame. The last thing you see are dinosaurs in the horizon. So
yeah,
I was going to ask about that moment. The dinosaurs on the horizon was a beautiful image. And again, it's within your budget. You did a great job with your effects, using lighting and your characters as your special effects rather than just a whole bunch of CGI. So you kept it within your budget. And, you know, the audience gets what's going on, of course. I'm curious if there were any major deleted scenes that you want to tell us about, something that you really held on to in your cuts and the lessons of editing that you learned you needed to cut.
It's more just because, again, it's such a, you pull one thread out of the story and the logic can kind of go. So it was more just pulling sections out of scenes. There's a much longer campfire scene. There's a longer taco scene. And that's the kind of stuff that just makes the movie better in the edit, when you're getting into scenes later and getting out of scenes earlier, and kind of, you know, bringing lines out that are subtext that exists there already. So I don't think we lost anything completely major. There's an alt opening too that was scripted that's different, but that moment is still.
Do you want to tell us what the alt opening was?
The alt opening, as written, was Niles kind of in a nod to Llewyn Davis, which is another movie we were thinking a lot about when we initially started on this, like the Death Bender version of the movie, back when we went to Palm Springs, with Niles kind of jolting up in the bar, similarly to what we see him do later in the movie before he sprints to the cave. And it's kind of a moment that you think is happening in the present timeline, but is actually a setting up, you know, is a flashback or a flash forward, I guess. But that we just decided to do something different.
So it just opens up with that, and then it ends up you're with him wandering through the desert at night and wandering into the wedding, into the speech at night. And the first time he enters the wedding is during the speeches, and we it was it's playing with this mystery of it a little more, and instead we went the other way of let's get our bearings a little quicker. And then
What does the character of Nana represent to you? Because she just kind of comes in with like literally a couple poignant sentences, and she kind of clues off Sarah towards the end that maybe things are going to be okay with what she says. And I'm just curious because it's always fascinating to see how like a side character that isn't driving the story forward comes in for just those little rich moments. So I'm just curious what that character means to you guys.
June
I
Squibb,
love my grandparents.
Hall of Fame, yeah.
Okay.
Those are the kind of, it's just like the stuff that happens at weddings too. I feel like
yeah.
It's kind of what who the JK character is too, just like little. And if if we're able to add to the mystery of the metaphysics of the thing through kind of like a reverent aside, it's always fun to kind of just pose that question.
Speaking of the metaphysics, through your research, did you find any way to get us out of this current simulation that we are trapped in right now? Because I'll do whatever it takes. Please get us out of this version of 2020. I want to reset. Look, toughest scene is always important. What was your toughest scene for each of you? Max on set, Andy on the page, and how did you creatively rise to the challenge to solve it? Not to put you on the spot, Max, but what was the toughest scene for you, and how did you rise to the challenge? And then Andy.
I think the toughest scene was probably shooting the ending because we had half a day out there, and we had a lot to try.
So all the stuff in front of the cave is what you're talking about?
No. The like them floating in the pool. I guess like the coda to the ending.
Okay.
Yeah, and that and I mean, anytime, everyone knows this, you shoot on water or like at high noon, and it's hard. So it was about kind of like putting them in a position to get comfy and seem at ease and blissful when it was actually kind of miserable out there. And then just like again, the Andy speech is a beast. And he did it just is like really minimizing the time between setups to give the actors as much time as possible to actually be doing the work in that case on that night when he was giving his speech.
Andy, your toughest scene on the page, the scene that gave you the sweats that you came back to again and again?
I would say the campfire scene, because it's a moment where Niles, his outlook on life is challenged by the one person that can challenge it, and Sarah's outlook on life is challenged by the one person who can challenge it. And it's in this like, it's a hard thing to navigate because they got them having a bunch of fun and getting to this point, but it's by that campfire that like they start to see the other side. I guess their characters start to like maybe think that they are wrong in themselves, and so that's like a certain self-awareness there, while also like it's where they fall in love. Two characters who didn't believe they can fall in love, didn't believe they can experience love, they experienced love. And so, to be honest, that's why like it became far more clarifying to me when I realized that's ultimately what the scene's about, is they're falling in love, which is why there's dinosaurs in there, because dinosaurs can't happen, just like they can't fall in love, but nope, there's dinosaurs, so therefore they can fall in love. Is it just because I like Jurassic Park? Is that why? I honestly don't know, but it's those two competing parts. But yeah, there was a lot to accomplish in a scene, and ultimately there was a much longer scene there that was rightfully cut shorter. But yeah, I mean,
Well, actually, only because you're saying it. Was it more of his background? Because even then he can't say or won't say what his job was before all this happened, and we learned literally nothing about him. But it seems like that scene where he's going to give a download. I love the fact that he does not give a download. So
that was actually, that's been had many discussions about that, and I think to us it was always that he, and I think and Andy did a great job performing this too, is that when he says I honestly can't remember, it's that he honestly can't remember. And it's a lot of that comes just from I'm still young, but I'm 34 and or about to be 34 next week. And I feel my own memory fading, and it's terrifying. And so I think about like he has been in there longer than he has been alive, longer, like he's been in this loop longer than he was on Earth. So of course his memory is going to fade. So however much longer that is, like it was very important to me that he honestly cannot remember what life was like before that.
Yeah.
And it's a very sad moment, and it's like him realizing that, like, oh God, like, this is it.
There ever be a sequel? Because the stuff with JK would insinuate that there could be a sequel if you wanted.
Let's see how this goes first. We have not thought about any kind of sequel at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, look, you guys, you've been very generous with your time. I love the film. Don't worry, we'll be able to wake up tomorrow and do this interview over again. I promise.
Yeah.
But yeah, I honestly, I've been buzzing about this film since Sundance. So congrats. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, man.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much. So great to meet you.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to director Max Barbakow and co-writer Andy Siara for joining us for today's Q&A to talk about their debut feature film, Palm Springs. And you know, it's such a good film. I hope you check it out on Hulu or catch it at a drive-in. It is absolutely hilarious. I don't want to spoil anything about it. Hopefully, if you listen to the spoiler section, you have already seen the movie. Otherwise, you should have been pressing pause. But make sure to check out Palm Springs from Hulu because you'll really love it. It's a great summer movie. Of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine. You could find us at www.backstory.net on a desktop or laptop. You could also find us through our iPad app. And you could read about the last year's worth of issues with a free with your subscription, with your paid subscription. And you know, we're adding more issues to our archive, but about the last year's worth are up there. And we're even working on a new issue during quarantine, issue number 42. It's going to have some really special stuff in it, stuff that I've been actually trying to get in the magazine for many years that has finally come through. So there's going to be a great read for you coming up on issue 42. And if you would like to support us as we build issue 42, feel free to subscribe now. You could use coupon code SAVE5, which will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. And you could use that coupon code at backstory.net. And look, it means a lot to me to have my Zoomcast listeners and my podcast listeners support my passion project. So thanks for giving Backstory a chance. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2020, all rights reserved. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.